This is Dr. Chris Robertson. I want to provide an overview for collaboration for improvement outcomes and also speak to the DNP project team. So when it comes to DNP essentials, you guys are familiar with organizational and systems leadership for quality improvement and systems thinking. You're also familiar with interprofessional collaboration for improving patient and population health outcomes. As we move forward to talk about collaboration that accompanies a DNP project with respect to the practice site as well as the DNP committee, you'll begin to see the various skills and competencies related to these essentials demonstrated. When it comes to your DNP project resources, sometimes people begin to think about, oh, this speaks to what supplies am I going to need, what types of equipment, but also keep in mind that it speaks to personnel. It speaks to all the resources that you're going to need. This includes the faculty resources. This includes the persons on your committee. This includes key players in the clinical practice site environment. And so it's important for you to acknowledge those resources that are tangible and intangible, but also, as you did after looking at the literature, be able to identify where you still may have gaps with respect to knowledge, with respect to skill, or with respect to effort. And so where you identify those gaps, that's where you may identify other key players or identify talents or skills within key players that may be underutilized, not recognized, or what have you, that you can leverage to help fill those gaps or address those gaps with respect to project resources. And so essentially goes back to the concept of collaboration with regards to working with your DNP project committee, as well as what I call the project team, the clinical practice site project team. There's gonna be some shared decision making. There are gonna be strategic alliances, interpersonal networks. You're gonna share ideas and knowledge and communicate, cooperate, and transfer knowledge. These same concepts are demonstrated here. Understanding that this is all a process and you will have a formal team and you will likely have an informal team. Sometimes I like to think of the DNP project committee as the formal team, and the informal team may be the practice site team. And so again, principles of communication, cooperation, transferring knowledge, coordinating, problem solving, and negotiating. This all comes along with collaboration. When it comes to knowing the difference between the terms interdisciplinary versus interprofessional, interdisciplinary obviously can limit your knowledge to a particular discipline. Keep in mind the DNP essential that speaks to not just nursing theories, but also being able to utilize theories from other sciences and from other disciplines. When you talk about interprofessional, this is interaction among professionals who may represent particular disciplines of knowledge, but who also additionally bring unique educational backgrounds, experiences, values, roles, and identities to the process. It's important to recognize that. It's important to recognize what your chair brings. It's important to recognize what your other committee member brings. And it's important to recognize the clinical expertise that your clinical mentor brings with respect to their contribution and role. Interprofessionality is the process by which professionals will reflect on and develop ways of practicing that provides an integrated and cohesive answer to the needs of the population. And so again, speaking to the collaboration that occurs between the various disciplines, the various roles, the various identities, and the value that everyone brings to the team, including the student. With respect to interprofessional collaboration, it's important that you ask who is needed. Who do you need to collaborate with? What faculty? What key players? What type of information is needed? It's not always nursing information Do you need information as it relates to the site's use of informatics? Do you need information that relates to business and management or statistics? When and where does collaboration occur? Do you need to establish some type of routine or scheduled committee meetings with your committee? Do you need to have some type of practice site project meetings? What's going to be happening during your immersion experiences? Do you need to have a set time that you provide some type of update or report to a key player at the clinical practice site? With respect to organizational and systems leadership, it's important that you model doctoral leadership skills, even as you are beginning to develop these. When you think about the leadership competencies that many think tanks have spoken to with respect to what's needed from healthcare professionals in this day and time, they talk about healthcare professionals that can transform healthcare, that can execute, and that can also work with people. And they want to see leadership that influences institutional policy. What you do, keep in mind, think about the implications. It's not just to do this project with 1 or 2 providers as a pilot for 12 weeks, provide a report, and I'm gone. You want it to influence beyond that 12-week time period, beyond those 2 providers. And so how you lead that process and how you implement that process and who you engage and how you speak to the implications and how you provide strategies for those implications and future recommendations is very important. And that comes from, or you being able to do that stems from you developing those skills and those competencies that go back to the DNP essentials. So when you look at various health leadership competency models, they speak to the need for healthcare providers to work in interprofessional teams, to use evidence-based practice, to apply quality improvement, and to use informatics. And so this is speaking to all healthcare providers. And so again, the DNP degree positions you to develop those skills so that you are an answer to the problem as it relates to the many challenges and the complexities and the issues that are going on within the healthcare system. So looking at interprofessional clinical models, consider this statement: a lack of communication and coordination of care leads to fragmentation, excess costs, and a healthcare system that is disease-oriented rather than health-oriented. It's important that we transform healthcare at the points of care, at the sites of clinical practice. And so the clinical practice model focuses on practice priorities, which is where the DNP's focus is. What's going on in clinical practice? Your proposal, the core of what you do should start from a clinical scenario, should start from a story of what you saw in practice, what you observed in practice. Again, using evidence-based clinical decision supports and also using your practice expertise. When it comes to collaboration, and even when it comes to working with your DNP project committee as well as your practice site team, change theory is important. Recall the lecture that introduced implementation science and the considerations. So you have to consider change theory and like theories as a guide when you're planning and implementing. And it's important to assess the organizational structures and the individuals that are going to be collaborating as part of the team. Understand the components of change theory, unfreezing, freezing, refreezing. Understand, and whichever model works better for you. Understand Cotter's 8-step change model, creating the urgency. How are you presenting and talking about the background and significance so that it is clear there is a need to address this problem now. Where your coalition? Who are you collaborating with to address it? What is the vision? You need to come to the table with, this is the practice change that needs to be implemented based on the evidence, and clearly communicate that vision, and obviously remove obstacles because you've identified them. And you've not only said this is going to be a challenge, but this is a potential strategy to address that challenge. Create those short-term wins, goes into evaluating outcomes. And there are some things that you will monitor and track, and perhaps provide, if you want to say, a progress report along the way. And build on the change. Once the project is done, you're going to have spoken to ways to sustain the change and hopefully anchor the change in corporate culture. And so, stages of team development. Keep this in the back of your mind. Obviously, your team, with respect to your DNP project committee, as well as your practice site team, have a shared purpose, a shared goal, and there has to be reciprocal trust. And so you want to recognize and value the team members and their unique roles and skills of each one. You want to support everyone function at the highest level of their skills, ability, or practice, and make sure there's a clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities. Again, collective responsibility and shared decision making. DNP project, you did your lit review, you identified your gaps. Now you're planning to address the problem. You will implement, evaluate, and disseminate, which may then lead you to other problems in which you do the cycle all over again. All of this requires collaboration. And as you move forward and practice scholarship, you will begin to collaborate with your peers and other disciplines with respect to addressing healthcare problems and transforming healthcare systems. So with respect to your committee, obviously you're going to have your chair. Everyone should have their chair in place by now. The chair should be DNP prepared faculty, and there are some exceptions at times. When it comes to how do you approach your chair, everyone should have told their chair about the PICOT question and at least spoken to how or what was their rationale for approaching the chair with regards to how their expertise would be of benefit to the project or of interest to the potential chair. The chair will evaluate the process as far as the progression, will evaluate the written work that's done, and support timely project completion. They're not responsible for it because when you complete and are able to move forward varies and depends on the student. The committee members obviously have an interest in the topic and contribute content expertise. They too facilitate the process for on-time completion, but that is student dependent. And so the student and the chair, I encourage students to make sure they have conversations with their chair about those gaps, about those skills and expertise that's needed for the team, just to make sure that you have a well-rounded team with complementary areas of expertise. With respect to the clinical mentor, they are there to provide guidance and advise at a particular practice site. They bring a certain level of clinical expertise and perspective that would otherwise not be present. And so even though you have persons who may be well versed with respect to evidence-based practice and the process, you have these people who, again, the clinical mentors bring that clinical expertise. And then the student who should have an active role and lead the project team and may at times find themselves feeling like they're having to manage conflicts. And consider this quote where it talks about students feel they're being shuttled back and forth by the opinions and experiences of the project faculty mentor and the project team members. As doctoral students become confident in their skills and knowledge, it is incumbent on them to step up and lead their project with the project faculty mentor and project team members providing guidance. I think we've spoken previously, and I reiterate here, students are to lead their project. They collaborate with their chair and their committee, but ultimately, when it comes to situations where if you have a 5-member committee and you feel like all 5 members are pulling in 5 different directions with respect to one particular component, if that student has not well informed themselves, if that student has not searched the literature, and if that student cannot confidently and firmly share their perspective in a professional manner in terms of this is the decision and the perspective that I support or that I would like to take, and this is why. And again, defending that from the position of the evidence and the literature. And when students are not able to do that, it creates the opportunity to be pulled in several different directions. So again, that's where you have opportunity to develop your leadership skills and be confident in those skills and be confident in that knowledge. And so when it comes to your project team, be it your committee or at the site, you do want to look and see, do we need to meet? How often do we need to meet? How do we need to touch bases and collaborate? This concludes